Hello everybody, welcome to part 18 of the Star Wars Legends Chronological Review Series. Today we are finally going to be ending our journey with the Tales of the Jedi comics with the final arc of the series titled Tales of the Jedi Redemption, which acts as a sort of epilogue to the story of Ulic Qel-Droma. However, before we get into that, we are actually going to be starting today's episode with a one-shot comic titled Shadows and Light. This comic comes from the Star Wars Tales comic series, which is basically an anthology series which bounces around between several different authors and eras. Some of these Star Wars Tales stories are kind of on the edge of what is considered canon, with some of them considered parodies or just outright non-canonical. But with Shadows and Light, which was featured in Star Wars Tales 23, doesn't seem like there's anything in it that conflicts with canon, so we're good. Shadows and Light takes place 3 years after the end of the Great Sith Wars and the defeat of Exar Kun, and follows the three Jedi Shayla Nur, Gunhan Saresh, and Duran Qel-Droma, the latter of which is actually the cousin of Ulic and Kay Qel-Droma. The three Jedi are participating in a Jedi operation known as The Hunt, which seeks to destroy Sith creatures known as Terran Tatex that Exar Kun had unleashed on various parts of the galaxy. Their search for the last ones leads them to Korriban, the Sith homeworld. During their search for the Terran Tatex, the Jedi find themselves doing things like seducing people for information and facing the possibility of killing an innocent person in a Sith ritual just so that they can blend in. Duran has visions of a future conflict involving powerful Sith and is afraid that the darkness of Korriban is corrupting them. Duran and Shayla admit their romantic feelings for one another, but when Gunhan finds out and they refuse to renounce their love, he's enraged at their deviance from the Jedi Code, and decides to leave them on Korriban to chase a Terran Tatek alone on Kashyyyk. Gunhan finds the creature he's looking for in Kashyyyk's Shadowlands, but fails to defeat the creature and is killed. Shayla and Duran feel Gunhan's death in the Force and find another Terran Tatek in the Valley of the Sith Lords. Although they wound the creature, it takes the life of Duran, who has a vision that someone named Revan will one day discover his Qel-Droma robe and wear it. Shayla can't really make sense of any of Duran's visions, but before he dies, they profess their love for another one last time. Falling deep into anger and seeking revenge for her beloved, Shayla follows the wounded creature to the tomb of Naga Sadow. In her final moments, she recounts the words of her master Ood, who had once given her a special Solari lightsaber crystal that was especially attuned to the light side. However, as Shayla gives in for her desire for revenge, we can see the blade of her lightsaber slowly fizzle out, and the story ends. So, overall, pretty neat little comic. Very clearly meant to be a prequel to Knights of the Old Republic with visions of Revan and other characters from that game. Upon a little bit of further research, these three Jedi characters that are featured in this comic are actually based on the diary entries of three dead Jedi that you can discover in the KOTOR game at Naga Sadow's tomb. Not sure how I feel about the visions being so clear and depicting characters we know are going to show up, like Revan and Malak. I feel like Force visions in Star Wars kind of lean a little bit too far into like predetermination that they're bound to happen, and kind of takes away from this idea of free will and choice that I feel like is really important to the core of Star Wars. I feel like it kind of cheapens the fall to the dark side or other actions of certain characters when we know that they are like destined to happen. But I guess you can always just like explain it away, always in motion, the future is, nothing is truly set in stone with Force visions. These things are just possibilities that have not yet to come, even though, of course, this comic came out after the game, so we know that it is going to happen. But, it was just meant to be a tie-in to the Knights of the Old Republic game. It's a very short comic, and on a bigger level, it's really cool to see Revan already having this kind of huge ripple effect on the Star Wars timeline before the story of Ulic Qel-Droma even gets all the way wrapped up. We just can feel this huge ripple effect that Revan has both in the future and the past. At the end of the day, it just makes me a little bit more excited to finally get into some of that Knights of the Old Republic era content a little bit later in this series. Certain elements from the Tales of the Jedi comics that we've already read are featured in here and that are cool to see, especially flashbacks to Ossus and Master Ood especially. Again, I always love these really weird, wise, ancient, alien Jedi masters that are very unique, and I'm happy that Master Ood got a little bit more time to shine after he got eviscerated on the surface of Ossus. They mentioned that the Terran Tatex had been unleashed by Exar Kun, and they weren't in the Tales of the Jedi comics, but I'm assuming that they will be in the Knights of the Old Republic games. So it's interesting to continue to see how Exar Kun and the Sith War, like, there's elements that we don't know about it yet, and it had a huge effect on the galaxy in ways that we haven't entirely seen, or we didn't bear witness to all of those effects in the comics themselves. After all, it makes sense that we didn't see every single battle and every single thing that Exar Kun was up to with his Sith research and his Sith alchemy. So as for the actual story of the comic, It was pretty cool. The story was pretty well written for a 22-page one-shot comic, and it felt like we instantly knew what the characters were about, what they wanted, what their goals were, and it was sad to see their goals fall apart because they let the dark side kind of break them apart and influence their petty differences. I have to say, and this is an incredibly minor thing, I'm a little confused about one thing concerning continuity. Gunhan gets upset at his two fellow Jedi for forming romantic attachments, and when just a few years earlier, Nomi Sunrider is having a husband and a child, and falling in love with Ulick is seen as normal and fine, and other Jedi were described as having mates and romantic partners. It seems like at this point in the timeline, partially because the prequels hadn't come out yet and we didn't have George Lucas's ideas of like celibacy in the Jedi Order, it just feels like this makes it a lot more obvious at what point in the real world this was made after we have Knights of the Republic in the prequels, even though at this point in the in-universe timeline it feels like relationships and romantic attachments isn't something that the Jedi are all that hung up about right now. I'm definitely prepared to see more discrepancies like this in the future. I know that the expanded universe is full of stuff like this, little minor details that don't quite line up right if you think about it hard enough. I'm sure that we could probably come up with some kind of reconciliation for it somehow anyway. Maybe it's just a certain aspect of Jedi dogma that gets brought up a lot later when the Jedi become more stagnant, or maybe only certain Jedi really hold hard and fast to those rules, and most of them know about the rules and they just don't really care. This is the golden age of the Jedi, so I'm not really surprised that most Jedi feel very enlightened and sort of a little more progressive in how they want to go about things, while there are still some sticklers to what is like the classic Jedi code. Well, now that Shadows and Light is out of the way, it's time to finish our Tales of the Jedi journey with Ulick Qel-Droma with the 5 issues of Tales of the Jedi Redemption. We pick up in the year 3986 BBY, a full 10 years after the end of the Great Sith War. A Republic pilot named Hogan ferries a passenger to Yavin 4, excitedly telling him about the history of the moon, not knowing that his passenger is Ulick Qel-Droma himself. The aged Ulick is hoping to find a place for peace and solitude, but the memories of the war still haunt him. After Ulick finds Yavin 4 not suitable for him, Hogan takes Ulick to the isolated glacier world of Renvar, which Ulick says will do nicely. Across the galaxy at the Exis station in the TDO system, Nomi Sunrider has called all of the Jedi for a convocation to discuss the future of the galaxy. Nomi's daughter Vina has grown up to be a teenager, and though her mother has a reputation as a great Jedi and a legendary hero, she's bored and resentful of her mother's unexciting role as a leader of the galaxy. On a whim, Vima decides to steal a mining ship for a joyride, but nearly gets dragged into the gravity well of a sun. Though she's rescued, she argues that if her mother had bothered to train her, she could have saved herself. Moving on to issue 2, on Renvar, Ulick reflects on his past, still completely unable to feel anything in the Force. During his reverie, he steps too close to a ledge and falls into an icy crevasse. Continuing to mourn his past, Ulick hears the voice of his late master Arca, encouraging Ulick to harness his inner strength even in the absence of his Jedi powers. Ulick resolves that he will live to honor his master's legacy, even if he does not know yet for what. Back at Exis Station, Hogan arrives, hoping that he can still catch part of the Jedi Convocation. The Jedi at the Convocation debate the dark legacy of Ulick Qel-Droma, and though Silvar the Cathar condemns Ulick and Nomi mourns him, Vima thinks that he couldn't be as bad as everybody says he is. Once the Convocation ends, Vima asks her mother again to begin her Jedi training, which Nomi once again postpones. Growing impatient, Vima sneaks aboard Hogan's ship, hoping to find Ulick Qel-Droma herself so that he can be her teacher. Hogan discovers Vima and recognizes Ulick from one of her holograms. Hogan takes Vima to Renvar, and though the place is cold and desolate, Vima is determined not to leave until she is a Jedi. Silvar and fellow Jedi Tot Donita take a journey to Ryloth to deal with a dispute between two warring clans. Though Silvar is quick to lead a war party to settle the dispute, Donita has already found a peaceful solution in accordance with Twilight tradition, sending the two clan leaders into the desert in exile. Feeling frustrated, Silvar asks for Donita to accompany her to her homeworld of Cathar. Continuing on to issue 3, Vima navigates the ruins of Renvar. She encounters Ulick through a pane of broken glass, and Ulick mistakes her for another ghostly memory of her mother, Nomi. Though Vima tells Ulick who she is and why she's there, Ulick rejects her, not wanting to be tormented by his past or the face of Nomi Sunrider. However, when a powerful blizzard sweeps the land outside the abandoned fortress, Ulick takes Vima to find shelter. On Cathar, the natives welcome back Silvar and celebrate her return. She seeks to participate in a Cathar ritual known as a blood hunt, hoping that it will cleanse her, and Donita accompanies her. Though Sylvar successfully tracks down and kills a queen Kiltic, an enormous insect creature, Donita points out that the deed did not quench Sylvar's anger, only allowing her to give into it. Donita leaves Sylvar to work out her anger on her own, reminding her of what happened to Ulic. Elsewhere, Hogon decides that he is going to give up the location of Ulic to the Jedi Council, as he's eager to witness a legendary Jedi battle like the stories of old. However, when Nomi discovers where her daughter is and what she's trying to do, she can only express anguish. In issue 4, Sylvar continues her blood hunt, killing wild animals in the hopes of purging her anger, but it is of no use. A Cathar scout comes to her with a message that Vima Sunrider has gone missing, and Sylvar leaves to pay Nomi a visit. Nomi reflects on the life of her late husband and her daughter's journey, and how she failed to give her daughter the Jedi guidance that she needed. Nomi admits to herself that there is nobody better to teach the cost of being a Jedi than Ulic Qel-Droma. Sylvar arrives to see Nomi, enraged that Nomi could allow her daughter to train under the galaxy's biggest war criminal. Hogon excitedly steps in, telling Sylvar that he can take her right to Ulic. Eventually, Nomi realizes how much she has been neglecting her daughter while tending to the needs of the Republic, and also vows to find Ulic before he can do too much damage. On Ren Var, Ulic begins teaching Vima everything that he knows. She builds her own lightsaber using one of her late father's Adegan crystals, just like her mother once did. Ulic eventually tires of training her, feeling that there is no more that he can teach her because he can no longer feel the Force, like an artist who cannot see to paint. Still determined though, Vima suggests that they try a different approach. Fully embracing the metaphor of a blind painter becoming a sculptor, the two use their lightsabers to create ice statues of Master Arca and Ander Sunrider, honoring their fallen predecessors. In the 5th and final issue, Ulic continues to teach Vima, engaging in more lightsaber sparring. He also teaches Vima that being a Jedi involves making many life and death choices, and that there isn't one true path to becoming a Jedi Master other than facing many ordeals. He asserts that anybody can understand the Force as long as they try hard enough. Eventually, however, Nomi discovers Ulic's crumbling fortress and finds her daughter with Ulic. Vima tells her mother about how Ulic didn't want to train her but did anyway and saved her from a deadly blizzard. As Vima shows her mother the ice sculptures, Ulic reflects on the teachings of his master, acknowledging that he did have more to learn and more to live for, hoping that he can now finally find peace. However, Sylvar also arrives at the fortress to confront Ulic, hoping to punish him for his crimes and avenge her mate, Credo. Ulic asserts that though Credo was influenced by Exar Kun, his choices were his own. He tries to warn Sylvar about the dangers of anger and the dark side, and after a lengthy duel, he finally resolves not to fight her as she is not his judge. Though Sylvar moves to finish Ulic, she withdraws her weapon, Ulic's words finally reaching her and freeing her from anger. Suddenly though, right at that moment, blaster bolts rip through Ulic. Hogon laughs gleefully, giddy at the thought of telling everyone in the galaxy that he killed Ulic Qel-Droma, the worst Dark Jedi and war criminal in the galaxy. Though she is enraged, Sylvar spares Hogon, who flees, saying that he'll never understand Jedi. Nomi and Vima mourn Ulic as he passes into the Force, something that Nomi says only a Jedi Master can do. Vima ponders that though Ulic could no longer touch the Force, he understood it more deeply than anybody, and had the heart of a true Jedi. So, in my opinion, this was a fantastic epilogue to the story of Tales of the Jedi. I think one of the biggest things that I've seen people complain about in Star Wars is that we don't get to see characters like Anakin Skywalker or Ben Solo really get to have the time to atone for their sins after they've lived most or part of their lives in darkness. And I think with Ulic Qel-Droma, we get an excellent example of exactly what that might look like when a Jedi character who maybe doesn't deserve redemption gets it and actually manages to do some good with the rest of his life after having such a long legacy of evil deeds. Ulic training Vima and helping Sylvar come over her anger, it just felt like excellent ways for him to really atone for some of the things he did and to turn his horrific experiences into wisdom that he can then impart on other people. I feel like Anakin and Ben Solo's final acts being saving somebody that they love at the expense of their own life is a great way to atone, but it's such a lingering question of what their lives might have been like if they had been given more opportunities to do even more to help fix this galaxy that is so dark and broken because of what they did. You know, what is it like to continue to live in a world where you harbor all of this guilt and everybody hates you? And I think that this comic arc is a perfect illustration of what a story like that for Anakin and Ben might look like. I'm also just Always super impressed. I know I said this in the last one, but I'm always super impressed with how these Tales of the Jedi stories end up effectively tying up all of their loose ends. Silvar and Vima were pretty minor characters in the original comics. Hell, Vima was just a baby who did nothing. Vima had no relevance to the plot almost whatsoever, and honestly could have just been left out, but now I see how much potential that she had at the end of this story to deal with Ulick's legacy. The scenes where she's teasing him during their lightsaber duel are honestly just really fun. I honestly see a lot of parallels between Vima and Ulick and Rey and Luke from The Last Jedi. This dynamic of like a young, naive female student and this really old, grizzled, broken down man full of regret, and her having to try and get him to teach her. It's just, I really love those stories, not just in Star Wars, of like an energetic, naive young student trying to get their broken old master to find their way again. There's even a really great parallel between the final shot of the comic with Ulick's robes disappearing into the wind and Luke's death in The Last Jedi when he disappears and his robes fly off into the wind. And I almost wonder if Rian Johnson was somewhat inspired by this comic when making episode 8. I know a lot of people who are big fans of Legends might not like The Last Jedi, but I like most major parts of Star Wars, so to see things like this connect in that way is super cool. One visual element that I was interested in that they never really addressed outright in the comic is this kind of coin or amulet that Ulick has on a necklace that he wears throughout the arc. It's never really, again, brought up or mentioned by any of the characters or addressed directly until Ulick gives it to Nomi as he dies, but it's featured and focused on heavily in several panels of the comic, and it's weird because the coin or ring or whatever this is a solid circle on one side, but a transparent ring with a hole in the middle on the other side. I wonder if there's some kind of thematic significance to that, if it represents Ulick becoming whole again or something about the duality of man, but I can't say for sure, and I really can't find anybody talking about it online either, so who knows. Hogun was a hilarious character to introduce in this story. Not only was he great comic relief for all the other characters who are overall going through some pretty heavy stuff, but it was interesting to have a character that isn't very close to the Jedi, but is also like a huge obsessed fan of them and galactic history. It's an in-universe point of view that I think is really, really unique. It is something that we kind of get in The Last Jedi, and I think it's a reflection maybe of also some more shallow Star Wars fans in real life who maybe are obsessed with like the history and the lore of the franchise, but ultimately don't really understand the emotional significance of certain stories or what the philosophy of the Jedi is actually about. As for him being the one to ultimately kill Ulick, it's pretty silly, but I think that ultimately the chain of events of him helping Silvar to Silvar sparing Ulick to Ulick still dying and finding peace in that was very impactful. I don't know, it feels ridiculous, but I still feel like it really fits and it all ties together. The art for this arc, as you might have already noticed, is completely different. We've got a completely new team of artists working on this arc specifically, and while I thought the art was good, I have to say that this style is personally a step down for me compared to the rest of the arcs from Tales of the Jedi, even if those other arcs kind of had more simplistic shading or detailing. It's just, I don't know, there was something really consistent and really nicely stylized and high fantasy about the other comics that I feel like is just kind of missing here. Don't get me wrong, the art here was still good, the desaturated colors and the very scratchy hatching of the shading of the lines, all of it contributed very well to the atmosphere of the story. Overall, a great conclusion of the story of Ulick Qel-Droma. I will give this a very solid 4.5 out of 5 mysterious Jedi necklace things. So pretty similar to the last video, we've got a couple of extra little stories to help us review and unpack the main arc that we've just read. The first one is the Vima Sunrider recording from The Essential Guide to the Force. This recording is essentially a retelling of all of the events from Tales of the Jedi, specifically the redemption arc from Vima's point of view, and she even repeats some of her thoughts and lines of dialogue from the comics. I'd say that the biggest takeaway here is that, at least in the eyes of Vima, there isn't a precise guide or rulebook to becoming a Jedi Master, just like Ulick says in the comic. One can only achieve the status of Master by facing certain ordeals and making certain life or death choices, and this is an idea that she took straight from Ulick. I think a lot of what is shown in the prequel and original trilogies illustrate how the Jedi being restricted by rules and guidelines and saying, this is exactly what you need to do to be a Jedi, ended up really being detrimental to them in the long run, and it chokes out a lot of opportunities to really do better as an order, and some of the most important decisions and greatest heroes of the order were the ones that bent or broke the rules. The next essential guide recording we're going to be covering is one by a figure known as Claw. Claw is recorded as having been an ancient Jedi who left the order in favor of the Sith, and Claw has a lot of insights on why he thinks the Sith order failed in its early days. One part of this recording chronicles his thoughts on the Great Hyperspace War, and he believes that more Sith should have been like Ludo Kresh, who was far more patient and cautious as opposed to the brash and opportunistic Naga Sadow. As Claw says, seize the day and you have the day, but wait for the right day to seize and you seize entire lifetimes. However, there is also a second Claw recording which gives some more details about some Sith spirits. Particularly, Claw focuses on the legacy of Marka Ragnos, whose spirit continued to affect galactic events such as the duel between Kresh and Sadow, as well as the anointment of Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma several hundred years later. He notes that some among the Sith still believe that the return of the spirit of Marka Ragnos is only a matter of time, as his spirit was never properly defeated. I think the two biggest notes we can take from these recordings is that, one, seizing the right day to strike is totally the strategy that the Bay Knight Sith and especially Palpatine used. So to see that kind of be foreshadowed far before the Darth Bane trilogy and the prequel trilogy, nice touch. But the other thing I think we can take away from this is that Sith are desperate to find any means to cling to life, and most of them who become spirits ultimately want to become, corporeal again, which is pretty hard when the dark side pretty severely decays your physical body, whether or not you've gotten into a new clone body or you're still using the one that you were born with. And is this foreshadowing for the return of Exar Kun later down the line? Who knows, but for now, we'll just have to wait and see. Alright, well that's it for part 18 of the Star Wars Legends Chronological Review series. Next time, we are going to be starting a new journey with a new line of comics titled Knights of the Old Republic, which is a prequel series for the video game of the same name, and features a brand new story, brand new cast of characters, takes place about 30 years after Tales of the Jedi Redemption. But as always, hope you guys enjoyed this one. I hope you're looking forward to the next one, and may the Force be with you always.